forgotten, which is a term I want to address in a moment, but things like World War I and particularly the Irish diaspora in America, which it's been very difficult in terms of popular history to have a lot done, specifically in Ireland. Miles has led the way over 25 years, at least more, not to be kind, but both through his own publications on World War I and the Irish in America, and through the History Show, which is an absolutely fantastic programme, which I've had the great pleasure of being on a number of times. I'm going to talk for a few minutes. I want to start off with some acknowledgements in relation to the book. I want to address the topic of the forgotten Irish, because forgotten is a term that gets thrown out. It's the most popular term. Everything now is deemed to be forgotten in Ireland. You see it consistently in terms of historical stories in the papers, in the media. You see it consistently used as titles for books. I'm going to argue over a couple of minutes why these people really are forgotten on a scale that's quite incredible. And then I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about the type of stories for anyone who hasn't read the book. Obviously, I'll be doing that after this. But just to talk about some of the information in this, because as Miles was saying, this is a book that's derived out of the American Civil War, but it is not of the American Civil War. An awful lot of the material in this are mainly women and children speaking in their own words and their own voices. They are the illiterate, poorest Irish immigrants who were given voice because of these files that are not being looked at. And I want to talk about why we might look at that. But first of all, obviously I have to thank Miles for that fantastic launch. And just, it should be noted that over the past, between 2011 and 2015, it was the 150th anniversary of the American Civil War, in which effectively nothing, despite the efforts of an awful lot of people, was done in the Irish state to commemorate the individuals who were involved. So apart from a couple of very small events, there was very little. But one of the major events that happened, and the only full conference that happened, came about because of Miles's work in the Hay Festival, Kells, where we had a day of lectures relating to the American Civil War. And that's a topic I'll return to in just a minute. I'll have to thank my publishers, the History Press Ireland, particularly Ronan Colgan, my publisher, and Beth Amplet, who edited the book. This is a book that could not have been written without digital access. I'm an independent historian with no money, so I can't go to the National Archives. All these pensions are in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. As a result of a digitization program, 11% of the 1.3 million pension files relating to widows and dependent parents of Civil War veterans, 11% of them have been scanned and are available online. And so what I've been doing for about 4 or 5 years is systematically going through these looking for Irish people, because I don't really do much else. When Celtic or Munster aren't playing on television. But through that period, there's been a number of people, particularly in the United States, anybody who knows American people, and it's going through a disappointing phase at the moment, but American people are among the most giving and friendly you will meet, and they are so open with information. And a number of them, people in the National Park Service like Chris Barr, a number of people in Ireland and America, Barbara Freeburn, Jim McGrath, Carol Mitchell and Peter Patton, have all given information that is added to the stories in this book. I kept the media rights to this book, and for anybody who reads it, the reason I kept the media rights to this book is because of the first chapter in it, which is about a woman from my home county of Limerick. And it is quite an exceptional story. It's a story that has everything. It involves Abraham Lincoln gets involved, the Secret Service in the United States got involved in this story. And I had written this story up. I'm not going to tell you what it's about, apart from the fact that it involves her son, who had a mental disability, who was stolen and sold into the Union Army, and it's her search for him. It was a story that I knew there was a whole raft of documentation that related to this story from the 1940s, that was last heard of in the 1940s. I'd written the chapter for this book, and I had put an appeal on my website saying if anyone finds this woman's documentation last heard from somewhere in East Limerick in the 1940s, please let me know, expecting to hear nothing. And then just about 3 months before I handed over the final manuscript, I got an email from a woman called Jane Gastineau. This is the wonders of the internet, who is the librarian at the Lincoln Financial Foundation Collection in Fort Wayne, Indiana. who had said that she was going through material to digitize and had been looking at material they had bought off an Illinois Lincoln collector in the early 1980s, and it transpired that this was all this woman's documentation that had been sold back. And again, to talk about the Americans, she then prioritized that. She digitized it all online, so I had access to tell that story. So, but that story is quite incredible and kind of has all the elements of a major motion picture. In any event, there's one person who has become a great friend of mine. All of these, as Miles was alluding to, these are all based on the files. We're familiar with them from our own War of Independence being released recently in 1916. They're based on the files of widows and dependent parents and dependent children of soldiers who died as a result of their service. And it's them attempting to prove why they're entitled to that service. And in order to do so, they give vast amounts of information about their own lives, before the war, before they leave Ireland, during the war and afterwards. So we can follow their stories throughout. The digitization process is run by Jackie Bedell in the National Archives in Washington, DC. And Jackie is just gold dust. Jackie's own family are of Irish descent. She's from Sligo. She's never had the opportunity to actually come to Ireland. It's one of my big ambitions to find some reason to get her over here. Jackie has been very free with advice and help, and is a person, above all others, really, that deserves a great vote of thanks from me. Obviously, I have to thank my own family, particularly my editors, who included my mother, Angela Gallagher, Sarah, who the last time I launched the book I was less than good about, but she couldn't have written this book without her. Been fantastic help throughout this period, and Dr. Louise Nugent. They've been a major help, but it is the advent of digital history that's allowed it to be written. Most of these files I went through in my living room in Cork. I wasn't doing it in the National Archives in the United States. But with the thanks out of the way, I should also thank Hodges Figgis, and the person who organises these events in Hodges Figgis is an old comrade from the archaeology world, Stephen Devlin, so I have to give a big shout out. You can't get away from archaeologists or reformed archaeologists, no matter where you go. But they do great launches in Hodges Figgis. That's what's up. I was doing a bit of advertising for this event, and somebody wrote a comment during the week in relation to it, and they said, how could anyone call Irish America forgotten? Which I thought was interesting, and that is generally a theme that people think. They think we do huge amounts of stuff in relation to Irish America, and the reality is that we don't. I talk about this a lot in my first book, but this is the biggest conflict. The American Civil War is the biggest conflict that any Irish person fought in outside of World War I. If you came from a county that saw major immigration in the 19th century, so take Donegal, Galway, Kerry, Mayo, Sligo, Monaghan, Cavan, Cork, this is the biggest war that any one of those counties ever saw by a major distance. It far exceeds World War I. Now you would have to think in terms of balance. What do we do in Ireland about these people who emigrated? I think you can get your answer in relation to recent years when we were trying to get some movement between 2011 and 2015 on actually looking at some of these immigrants. Well, one of our great historians of the diaspora, Dr. Enda Delaney, who's in Edinburgh, even talks about this from both the state perspective and from a historical perspective, from a perspective of historical research. And he talks about how we leave these people with, as I quote, tearful farewells at Irish ports. So we talk about the famine, and these people get on a boat and go wherever they're going, and then it's best of luck. And we don't look at them. Our historians tend not to look at them very much, certainly not to the degree that they should do, and our state does not look at them. I think one of the really good examples of that, and I tried a lot of things. I wrote to the Dáil to try and get the Irish Brigade flag out for a few weeks from the Dáil to the public. I wrote in 2010. I got a response from a Sinn Féin representative last week about that. But there is just no interest in it. We tried a number of academics, and we wrote a letter to the Commemorations Committee seeking a small fund of a few €100 so that we could have an academic conference. There was no academic conference on Irish immigration during the 1860s throughout this whole period, and it was denied. it was turned down on the basis that it was to do with a civil war and it wasn't something we wanted to really talk about. I think, though, the greatest indicator of this is if you look at our own state engagement when we go to the United States. And I've written a lot about this. Our president, who I have a lot of time for, Michael D. Higgins, gave a talk in Faneuil Hall in Boston in Massachusetts. On the same year, 150 years previously, that an Irish regiment had been stationed in that hall before they went and got slaughtered in the Civil War. It wasn't mentioned in his speech. There was no reference to Irish involvement in this conflict. Particularly one that I got particularly annoyed with was in 2015. We, as a tiny country, have a ridiculous access to the American political system. We're the only country of our size who managed to get meetings every year with the President of the United States. Why is that? It isn't because they all think we're great people. It's because of the immigrants who went before. And I think we owe it to those immigrants to actually try and look at their stories and tell their stories. In 2015, the 150th anniversary of the end of the war, on the exact date when thousands of Irish people, Irish immigrants who were fighting in that conflict, were dying 150 years before, the Taoiseach went into the White House and he told the President of the United States that it is 150 years since W.B. Yeats was born, and by the way, we're having a big commemoration of 1916 next year. Be sure and come back. And that is our interaction with Irish America. Our interaction with Irish America is to get Irish Americans to come back here and spend their dollars. And I've become quite jaundiced about this over recent years, but that is fundamentally, we do not engage with these people as we should. And I hope it's something that might change. And it comes with a price that we don't do this. About 180,000 Irish-born men served in Union forces in the American Civil War. Tens of thousands more Irish Americans, the children of famine victims. Many of the men who served were famine victims, if you want to call them victims, famine immigrants at least, who served in this war. And we haven't looked at them, and because we haven't looked at them, we have missed what is, without any doubt, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest repository of information about 19th century Irish people, not just immigrants, anywhere in existence. Because this is the only source, these pension files, where you will hear people talking in their own voice. It's the only time you'll hear them say what it was like for them to immigrate. Most of the people who are writing these letters, odd as it may seem, were actually illiterate. These people didn't write letters themselves, they got other people to write them for them, and then when they got delivered, their family, somebody who could read in their family, read them out to them. This is the lowest level of Irish social history, and there are 1.3 million of these files, and 180,000 Irish people served in this war. So you can do the maths as to how many tens of thousands of files there are relating to Irish people and Irish immigrants. To give you a flavour of just some of the material that's in these files, effectively, the federal government didn't want to give anyone a penny unless they were sure that they deserved it. So you had to prove everything. You had to prove if somebody was who they said you were, if you were married to them. You might have to write back to a priest in Ireland and say, you have to pay for this, of course. Could you please write a note to say that we were married on such and such a date in Ireland? You would have to give affidavits to say your entire family history with this person. Your family would have to give affidavits to say, yeah, they're telling the truth. This is where this person worked, this was the job they had, this is how many children they had, all of this type of information. Their employers gave affidavits. Sometimes their landlords gave affidavits. Comrades gave affidavits. A ream of information is in there. One of the major sources of information that I use, and I use it particularly in one section of this book, a lot of people gave up the letters that their relatives wrote home to them to the Pension Bureau to prove the association. And I've systematically been going through these files now. I have in the region of 2,000 pages of Irish immigrants' letters, which I think is the biggest number from a single source anywhere in the world, written by Irish immigrants that have never been looked at before, that have been handed in. So these people were giving up these letters, never to be seen again, so that they could get this money. And to give you an idea of the amount of money, in 1893, 40% of the entire United States federal budget was being spent on American Civil War pensioners. That's the scale of the money that's being spent. And so there's a huge amount of documentation relating to it. I mentioned that it's not just about the Civil War, guys, and some of the best files actually do relate to people with social issues, and one of the sections in the book deals with that. The Pension Bureau, being the 19th century, were a kind of a misogynistic bunch. They were particularly keen to make sure that no woman who might be doing something that they deemed to be immoral was getting money. So, for example, if you remarried, you lost your pension entitlement. Or if in later years, if you cohabited with a man who you weren't married to, you lost your pension entitlement. But if they thought that you were doing this, they launched an investigation like you wouldn't believe. And again, this comes back to what Miles was talking about in relation to, it's obviously a horrific event for them, but the information. These people sent out special examiners who would interview dozens of people, and it literally is every detail of people's lives. So we have stories in here relating to women who had alcohol issues and their children hiding in outhouses at the back of tenement blocks in New York. It extends the story for me, I think. I often say that these people had two great traumas in their lives, the famine and then the Civil War. So we can follow them across the water now and look at these stories, and it's deserving of an awful lot more attention than it gets. I'm going to just read some small extracts just to give you a flavour of that, of one of these stories to finish up, and then everyone can just drink wine. But this is one of the stories. So the 35 stories in the book are based around one specific family name, and where possible I've tried to say where they come from in Ireland and then the state that they were associated with in the United States. And this particular family are the Murphys, and they were from Monaghan town. And they ended up in Illinois, living in a small hut where they cut prairie grass a few miles outside Chicago to eke out a living. And the mother, the matriarch in this story, her son was killed at a place called Missionary Ridge during the Civil War, fighting with the 90th Illinois Infantry, Chicago's Irish Legion. So her son had died. He was the main financial support for her. Her husband was gravely ill and was unable to move, and she also had a husband who had a disability. And the first letter I